Did New York really invent the skyscraper, or did we just crown it king? While we celebrate the Empire State and the home insurance building, ancient sites were already reaching for the clouds, without steel or elevators. Today, we're busting the myth of the first skyscraper and uncovering the vertical ambitions of cities you've probably never even heard of. What really makes a skyscraper a skyscraper? Is it just about being tall, or is there more going on beneath all that glass and steel? If you Google it today, the modern definition is pretty straightforward. A skyscraper is a tall, continuously habitable building, typically supported by a steel frame and serviced by elevators. These were the innovations that allowed buildings to stretch into the sky without crumbling under their own weight. For most historians and architects, the birth of the true skyscraper began in the late 1800s in the United States, specifically in Chicago and New York. The word skyscraper itself first popped up around the 1880s. Back then, it was slang, sometimes even used for tall ships' sails or especially lanky horses. But when buildings began rising past 10 stories and punching into the sky, the term stuck. Still, here's the twist. Height alone isn't the only metric. A tall church spire isn't a skyscraper. Neither is a watchtower. Why? Because skyscrapers aren't just about soaring. They're about stacking human life vertically. Offices, homes, hotels, entire ecosystems packed floor over floor. A living space that climbs. And this raises a curious question. What if skyscrapers existed long before we even had the word? Think about it. If the core idea is vertical living, dense, multi-story structures that serve as housing or hubs of human activity, then maybe, just maybe, we've been overlooking civilizations that built upward out of necessity, not innovation. Before we even dreamt of skylines, some ancient cities had already mastered them. So, the next time you glance up at a towering structure and marvel at our modern progress, ask yourself, are we really the first to reach for the sky, or just the first to brand it? Open any American architecture textbook and you'll probably find the same name repeated over and over. The Home Insurance Building. Built in 1885 in downtown Chicago, it stood 10 stories tall, just 138 feet. Modest by today's standards, but revolutionary at the time. Why? Because this wasn't just a tall building. It was a new kind of tall building. Instead of relying solely on thick, load-bearing masonry walls, the Home Insurance Building used a steel frame skeleton to support its weight. This meant builders could go higher without making the base absurdly wide or heavy. Windows got bigger, floors got lighter. Vertical architecture had finally broken free from centuries of stone and brick limitations. It's why the Home Insurance Building earned its crown as the world's first skyscraper. It even got torn down in 1931 with a sort of ceremonial reverence, as if the building itself was a historical artifact. And in many ways, it was. But here's the thing. It wasn't the tallest building of its time, and it certainly wasn't the first to reach for the skies. Cathedrals, minarets, and multi-story dwellings had existed for centuries before. So what makes this one first? Perhaps the answer lies not in size, but in how we define progress. The Home Insurance Building was the first of its kind, a turning point in engineering and design that made future skylines possible. But was it really the first ever attempt at vertical living? Because if height isn't everything, and if human ingenuity predates industrial steel, then surely some earlier civilizations must have tried stacking life upward in their own way. And maybe they didn't need blueprints or elevators to do it. So what counts more? Being first with new technology or being first with the idea? But to find the true pioneers of vertical living, we have to leave steel and glass behind and head to places where skyscrapers were carved from stone and stacked with mud. If you thought skyscrapers were born in Chicago, brace yourself, because the Hadramaut Valley of Yemen has a story that rewrites everything. Rising out of the desert like a mirage is the ancient city of Shibam, a honeycomb of towering mud brick buildings, each one packed tightly within fortress-like walls. From a distance, it looks almost surreal, like someone dropped a miniature Manhattan in the middle of the sand. In fact, it's often nicknamed the Manhattan of the desert. But here's the twist. This skyline isn't 100 years old. It's over 400 years old, maybe more. Built as early as the 16th century, Shibam's buildings stretch up to 11 stories high, all constructed entirely out of sun-dried mud bricks. No steel, no concrete, no fancy rebar or machinery. And yet, these ancient towers don't just exist, they thrive. Many are still lived in today. The city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not just for its beauty, but for what it represents: a vertical urban strategy centuries ahead of its time. So why build upward in the middle of a desert? It wasn't about showing off, it was about survival. Shibam's design was a defense mechanism. With frequent Bedouin raids threatening the valley, residents needed to fortify their lives, literally. By stacking homes skyward, the city could shelter its people within thick walls, behind limited gates, using fewer guards. It was one of the earliest examples of urban density as protection. And the engineering? Mind-blowing. Builders had to think through every detail, from weight distribution to water damage to the blistering desert sun. These weren't just homes, they were a delicate balancing act of physics and craftsmanship, shaped by necessity and hardened by centuries of use. Imagine building a vertical city without cranes, without concrete, and without any room for error. That's what Shibam did, and they did it so well that their methods still baffle architects today. How many modern skyscrapers will be standing fully inhabited after 400 years? So, if the skyscraper isn't just about steel, height, or elevators, but about ambition, adaptability, and urban ingenuity, then maybe, just maybe, the title of first skyscraper city doesn't belong to Chicago after all. So far we've seen mud brick giants in the desert. Now let's talk about Italy. Because if skyscrapers were a competition, medieval Italy was already flexing centuries before Chicago broke ground. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the city of Bologna found itself in a very unusual arms race. Not of weapons, but towers. Dozens of wealthy families began erecting tall, narrow structures right in the heart of the city. Why? Prestige, power, and honestly, a bit of petty one-upmanship. These weren't just homes, they were vertical bragging rights. At one point, Bologna boasted over 100 towers, piercing the skyline like a forest of stone fingers. Some reached dizzying heights for the era. The Asinelli Tower, still standing today, soars over 300 feet. Keep in mind, this was the 1100s. No reinforced concrete, no cranes, just brick, muscle, and medieval ego. Nearby, the hill town of San Gimignano joined the craze. Nicknamed the medieval Manhattan, it once had 72 towers competing for the sky. Today, only a few remain, but the effect is still serene. Walking through the town feels like stepping into an architectural time capsule, where height equals honor. Were they practical? Not always. Many towers were cold, cramped, and better suited for looking down on rivals than living comfortably. But here's the thing, they were habitable, structurally ambitious, and designed to last. That's more than you can say for most flashy architectural stunts today. It begs the question, if steel and elevators aren't the only criteria, could medieval Italy be the real birthplace of the skyscraper mindset? Turns out, Italy wasn't just fighting over land, they were fighting over air rights, 800 years before New York. And that changes how we tell the story of vertical architecture. So what happens when we return to the modern era, but look somewhere most people never do? Well, just beneath the streets of New York, there's a hidden track that defies everything we thought we knew about underground design. It's secretive, elite, and completely off the public grid. So who really built the first skyscraper? It all depends on how you define it first. If you're focused on engineering innovation, Chicago's home insurance building earns its title. It changed how we build upward, with steel skeletons, elevators, and a whole new urban mindset. But if you're measuring by vertical living, Shibam's mud brick towers might have beat them by centuries. And if your metric is height as a social flex, well, 12th century Bologna already turned the skyline into a bragging contest. Each contender tells a different story, not of who reached the highest, but of why they reached at all. In Chicago, it was about maximizing space, modernizing cities, and rewriting architecture. In Shibam, it was survival, stacking homes to defend against invaders and flooding. And in medieval Italy, it was ego, pride, and family rivalry taken to ridiculous new heights. Literally. Isn't that fascinating? That three completely different civilizations, all with vastly different tools and goals, ended up solving the same problem: how to live vertically in a world built horizontally. Maybe this isn't a question of who got there first. Maybe it's a story about how deeply human the need to rise above truly is. We've always looked up, for safety, for power, for status, for beauty. From mud towers to glass giants, the race to the sky wasn't born in America. It's ancient, global, and deeply human. So the next time someone points to the gleaming skyline of Manhattan or Dubai and calls it a modern marvel, just ask them, sure, but what do you call an 11-story mud tower that's still standing after 500 years? The skyscraper isn't a singular invention. It's a global instinct. Skyscrapers didn't start with steel or glass. They started with mud, rivalry, survival, and ambition. Long before boardrooms and blueprints, humans were already reaching for the sky. For safety, for pride, and sometimes just to prove a point. So, the next time you stare at a city skyline, whether it's New York, Dubai, or somewhere less famous, remember, the instinct to build upward didn't begin in the 1800s. It's a tale as old as civilization itself. Drop a comment with your favorite skyline and let us know if you'd ever heard of Shibam before today. And that's all about it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. For more urban legends, hidden histories, and surprising architecture facts, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss an update, and drop your comments below, because we're always listening. See you guys in the next one.